The bus brakes screeched at the Half-Way Tree terminal, a violent, grinding protest of metal on metal that shattered the morning air. The sound echoed off the concrete, drowning out the city's constant, low-frequency roar. Samuel stepped down onto the pavement, his weight shifting as he landed. His sneakers were worn thin, the rubber soles flapping against the hot, unforgiving asphalt with every step he took. The heat rose from the ground in shimmering waves, pressing against his legs and stinging his eyes. He stood still for a moment, letting the momentum of the departing bus carry the rest of the passengers away. He was 9 years old, and the terminal felt like a vast, hollow cave. The air tasted of diesel exhaust and scorched dust. He looked up, but the sky was obscured by the jagged silhouettes of buildings and the tangled web of power lines overhead. He adjusted his stance, trying to find a rhythm in the chaos. But the terminal was a machine that did not account for him. He took a breath, felt the grit of the city settle in his throat, and began to move forward, his feet striking the ground in a steady, uncertain cadence. Samuel pushed deeper into the terminal, his hand diving into his pocket to confirm the presence of the $50 note. His fingers were damp with sweat, the paper feeling fragile and slick against his skin. It was his only anchor in a world that seemed to be spinning too fast. Around him, the crowd surged like a river of strangers. People moved with sharp, purposeful strides, their eyes fixed on horizons he could not see. He tried to catch the gaze of a man walking past, but the man looked through him as if he were made of glass. Samuel stepped back to avoid a collision, his shoulder brushing against a heavy briefcase. Nobody apologized. Nobody stopped. He navigated the tide, keeping his head down, his focus narrowing until the only thing that mattered was the weight of the money in his pocket. He reached the center of the square, where the clock tower loomed over the terminal like a silent, indifferent judge. He gripped the note tighter, his knuckles white, and waited for the crowd to decide his next move. The sun dipped behind the skyline, bleeding orange light across the terminal floor. Samuel moved toward a small stall, his hand trembling as he pulled the $50 note from his pocket. He traded the paper for a single dense loaf of bread and a plastic bottle of water. The transaction was quick, clinical, and final. He walked away, the weight of the money gone, replaced by the meager supplies tucked under his arm. He scanned the perimeter of the square, looking for a break in the movement of the crowd. Behind a stack of wooden crates near a fruit stand, he found a narrow gap. He squeezed into the space, his knees hitting the hard ground. The air here was thick, heavy with the cloying, sweet stench of rotting mangoes and damp earth. He sat back against the rough wood, the splinters pressing into his skin. He tore off a piece of bread and chewed, the dry texture catching in his throat. He pulled his knees to his chest, tucked his head down, and listened to the distant, rhythmic pulse of the city. This was the end of his first day. This was his new home. The morning sun hit the crates, burning away the night's dampness. Samuel crawled out, his joints stiff from the cold ground. He stood up, shaking the dust from his hair, and began to walk. The terminal was a different beast in the daylight, louder and more aggressive. He moved with purpose now, watching the merchants. He stood near the fruit stalls, his eyes tracking every movement. He learned quickly. The man at the corner stall was loud, prone to shouting, and would throw rotten produce at anyone who lingered too long. Samuel gave him a wide berth. 3 stalls down, a woman with tired eyes worked the counter. She didn't shout. When she cleared her inventory, she would toss a bruised banana toward the crates, not looking to see who caught it. Samuel made a note of her rhythm. He mapped the terminal by these interactions, marking the safe zones and the hostile ones. He spent hours watching, learning the timing of the deliveries and the temperament of the sellers. He wasn't just existing in the space anymore. He was cataloging it. By the time the sun reached its peak, he had a mental map of his world. He knew exactly where to stand to be useful, and exactly when to vanish to stay safe. The terminal was not just a place of commerce, it was a gauntlet of moving steel. Samuel learned to read the taxi drivers before they even turned the wheel. He watched for the slight angle of the front tires and the sudden acceleration that signaled a shortcut through the pedestrian lanes. One afternoon, a yellow sedan swerved toward the curb, missing his feet by mere inches. The wind of its passage ruffled his hair. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped back, calculated the driver's trajectory, and adjusted his path to stay in the blind spot of the traffic flow. He became a shadow that moved between the heavy metal. When the sun dipped, the city lights flickered to life, casting long, erratic shadows. He found a new spot, elevated enough to see the terminal entrance but hidden from the main thoroughfare. He learned to sleep in fragments. He kept one eye open, watching the rhythmic pulse of the street lamps as they hummed and buzzed above him. Every flicker of the light was a heartbeat. He existed in the gaps between the noise, a silent observer in a world that never stopped moving. He was no longer just surviving. He was anticipating. The terminal began to recognize him. He was no longer the stray boy hiding in the shadows, but a constant presence near the clock tower. He started to refine his daily routine to match the pulse of the commuters. When the morning bus arrived, he was there, ready to clear the debris left behind by the departing crowd. He moved with a quiet efficiency that caught the attention of the local merchants. One morning, he noticed a vendor struggling to drag a heavy crate of oranges toward the display stand. Samuel stepped forward, gripped the edge of the wood, and helped push it into place. The vendor didn't say a word, but he pushed a small bag of peanuts toward Samuel as payment. It was a silent contract. Samuel began to anticipate the needs of the square. He knew which bus driver preferred a clean windshield and which merchant needed help lifting heavy stock. He became a fixture, blending into the background of the terminal like a piece of the architecture. The crowd no longer surged past him as if he were glass. They began to adjust their paths to avoid him, acknowledging his space in the square. He moved through the terminal with a new sense of ownership, his steps measured and deliberate. By the time the sun hit the zenith, he was not just a boy in the city. He was a part of its machinery, essential and known. The softness of childhood evaporated under the relentless sun of the terminal. Samuel stopped looking for ways to be helpful and started looking for ways to be efficient. He watched a new boy arrive, eyes wide and searching, clutching a bag of bread as if it were gold. The boy tripped near the fruit stand, dropping his meager supply into the dirt. A group of older scavengers descended, snatching the bread before the boy could even stand. Samuel stood 10 feet away, hands deep in his pockets, watching the scene with a flat, unblinking stare. He did not step forward. He did not intervene. He simply recorded the event, noting the speed of the scavengers and the lack of reaction from the merchants. He learned that pity was a luxury he could no longer afford. His movements became sharper, his decisions calculated for maximum gain. When he walked through the square, he no longer drifted. He cut through the crowd with intent. He studied the hierarchy of the terminal, identifying who held power and who was merely fodder for the system. He began to anticipate the cruelty of the streets. The boy who once felt the sting of exclusion now looked at the world with a cold, analytical precision. He had become a predator in the concrete jungle. From the shadows behind the fruit stand, Samuel watched the terminal transform as evening approached. The air grew heavy with the scent of exhaust and expensive perfume. He pressed his back against the rough wood of the crates, his fingers tracing the splinters, while his eyes tracked the movement of the commuters. They emerged from the buses in a steady stream, moving with a purpose that ignored the grit of the terminal floor. He watched a woman adjust her pace, her heels clicking rhythmically against the asphalt, oblivious to the boy watching from the dark. She carried a leather bag that looked heavy with secrets and currency. Samuel compared the polished surface of her shoes to the worn rubber of his own. He noted the way the crowd parted for those who looked like they belonged, creating a clear path through the chaos. He felt the damp chill of the ground beneath him, a stark reminder of his own position in the hierarchy. The divide was absolute. He remained motionless, a silent observer in the dark, measuring the distance between the crates and the life he intended to claim. The rhythm of the terminal shifted as the evening bus arrived. Commuters surged forward, a tide of bodies pushing against the metal gates. Samuel stood near the edge of the flow, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced indifference. A man pushed past him, moving with a frantic, jagged pace toward the boarding line. In his haste, a leather object slipped from his grasp and hit the asphalt with a dull, heavy thud. The man did not notice. Samuel moved instantly. He dropped to his knees, his fingers closing around the cold leather before anyone else in the crowd could react. He pulled his hand back into the shadows of a nearby pillar. The wallet felt solid, heavy with the weight of someone else's life. He traced the grain of the leather, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was not a discarded newspaper or a scrap of fruit. The choice hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He could vanish into the labyrinth of alleys, or he could step into the light. Samuel did not hesitate. He pushed off the pillar, his sneakers finding traction on the slick concrete. He hit the crowd at a dead run. Shoulders slammed into his ribs, but he adjusted his weight, weaving through the gaps like a needle through fabric. The air in the terminal felt thick, pressing against his face, but he ignored the resistance. His lungs began to burn, a sharp metallic taste rising in his throat. He kept his eyes locked on the back of the man ahead. The man was moving fast, oblivious to the boy closing the gap. Samuel vaulted over a discarded crate, his feet pounding against the asphalt with a rhythmic, desperate intensity. He dodged a luggage trolley, the metal wheel grazing his heel, but he did not slow down. His heart hammered in his ears, drowning out the city noise. He pushed his legs harder, his muscles screaming for relief, but he refused to yield. He saw the next bus stop looming ahead, the man slowing his pace. Samuel surged forward, his hand tightening around the leather wallet. He hit the final stretch, his stride lengthening, his focus narrowing. Samuel skidded to a halt, his chest heaving, his boots scraping against the concrete. He reached out and tapped the man's leg. The man spun around, his expression shifting from irritation to sudden, sharp confusion. Samuel held out the wallet. His hand was steady, despite the tremors running through his limbs from the exertion. The man stared at the leather in Samuel's palm, then looked down at the boy, his eyes widening as he registered the grime on Samuel's face and the intensity of his gaze. The man fumbled with the wallet, pulling out a crisp bill, his fingers trembling slightly as he held it toward Samuel. Samuel shook his head. He did not want the money. He took a single step backward, his eyes locking onto the man's for a fleeting second, a silent assertion of his presence. Before the man could speak or reach out again, Samuel turned. He pivoted on his heel and moved into the dark space between two parked vehicles. He left the man standing by the bus stop holding the wallet, staring into the empty space where the boy had been only a heartbeat before. Samuel found a dry patch of concrete beneath the metal awning of a shuttered shop. He sat down, pulling his knees to his chest. The rain began to tap against the corrugated roof, a steady, rhythmic drumming that masked the distant city noise. He looked at his hands, still stained with the dust of the terminal, and felt the lingering heat of the wallet he had returned. The man's shock had been a mirror. In that look, Samuel saw not a beggar, but a boy who had held the power to keep or to give. He shifted his weight, pressing his back against the brick wall. The cold seeped through, but he did not move. He watched the legs of the commuters passing by on the sidewalk, a blur of motion that no longer felt like a river he was drowning in. He was a ghost, yes, but one who had learned to walk through walls. He could remain invisible, or he could step into the light. He stood up, his movements deliberate, and stepped out from the shelter to watch the flow of the terminal with new eyes. Samuel stood at the edge of the square, his eyes tracking the flow of the crowd. He no longer saw a chaotic surge of strangers. He saw patterns. The morning rush peaked at 7, then ebbed, leaving the merchants vulnerable to the midday heat. He watched the buses pull into the terminal, noting the exact seconds they idled before the drivers grew impatient. He counted the rotations of the clock tower's minute hand against the arrival of the crosstown line. Everything had a rhythm. The taxis that cut corners too sharply did so at the same intersection every 20 minutes. The vendors who threw out bruised fruit followed a predictable schedule based on the arrival of the delivery trucks. He leaned against a stone pillar, his breathing slow and measured. Fear had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He was learning the language of the terminal, and for the first time, he was ready to speak back. Samuel moved to the newsstand, where the morning papers were discarded in a heap. He gathered the damp sheets, smoothing them out against his thigh. A vendor near the bus bay needed to know the morning's headlines to chat with his regular customers, but he never had time to read. Samuel approached, holding out a paper with the lead story highlighted by a smudge of grease. The vendor paused, looked at the headline, and tossed a half-eaten sandwich onto the counter. It was a simple exchange, but it sparked a new path. Samuel began to watch for more than just news. He listened to the merchants complain about missing shipments or delayed deliveries. He started walking the perimeter of the terminal, gathering scraps of talk. When he heard a driver mention a shortcut blocked by construction, he took that detail to the fruit seller who relied on timely deliveries. The seller traded a bruised apple for the tip. Samuel realized that information moved faster than any bus and held more value than any discarded scrap. He stopped scavenging for leftovers and started hunting for facts. He became a silent broker, moving through the crowd with a purpose that made the vendors look up as he passed. He was no longer just a boy in the terminal. Samuel became the terminal's pulse. When the bus from the north ran 30 minutes late, the drivers stopped checking their watches and started looking for him. He stood by the clock tower, his posture rigid, watching the horizon for the familiar dust cloud. He knew the routes better than the dispatchers. One morning, a frantic merchant tore through his stall, searching for a brass key to his storage locker. The man kicked over crates and cursed the air. His business stalled. Samuel walked over, reached behind a loose brick in the wall, and held out the key. The merchant froze, took the metal, and stared at the boy as if he had conjured it. From that day, the requests never stopped. Where was the lost shipment of produce? Samuel pointed to the loading bay behind the station. Which bus had the broken heater? Samuel gestured to the third lane. He became the architect of the terminal's daily order. He moved through the crowd with a steady, purposeful stride, his presence now a necessity rather than an intrusion. Merchants saved him the best of their stock, not out of pity, but as payment for his efficiency. He was the fix for every snag, the answer to every delay, and the silent authority that kept the terminal running on time. The seasons cycled through the terminal, marked by the changing intensity of the sun on the asphalt and the shifting rhythm of the crowds. Samuel grew into the space, his movements shedding the frantic energy of a child for the deliberate, measured pace of someone who knew every inch of his domain. The years stripped away the vulnerability that once defined his existence. He no longer looked for a place to hide. He occupied the center of the square as if he had built it himself. The weight of his influence grew with each passing month. Where he once sought scraps to survive, he now managed the flow of goods and information that kept the terminal alive. The vendors who had once ignored him now moved their stalls to better align with his path. He navigated the terminal not as a ghost, but as a fixture, his presence a silent command that the city obeyed. The burden of being an unwanted child had evaporated, replaced by the heavy, steady weight of urban expertise. He stood at the base of the clock tower, watching the buses arrive and depart with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. The terminal was no longer a labyrinth of strangers, it was a machine, and he was the one who held the gears in place. He had become the pulse of the square. Samuel stood at the base of the clock tower, his feet planted firmly on the cracked concrete. He did not lean, he did not fidget. He occupied the space with a stillness that drew the eye. His gaze swept across the terminal, tracking the movement of every bus and the pace of every passenger. When a delivery truck blocked the main thoroughfare, causing a cascade of honking horns and stalled engines, Samuel did not shout. He stepped into the lane, raised one hand, and pointed toward the service alley. The driver saw him, nodded once, and reversed immediately. The traffic resumed its flow. Samuel returned to his position, his back straight, his shoulders square. He was the anchor point of the entire square. Every vendor knew his location. Every driver checked the clock tower before pulling out. He held the pulse of Half-Way Tree in his hands, feeling the vibration of the city through the soles of his feet. His eyes remained sharp, scanning for the next inefficiency, the next delay, the next movement that required his intervention. He was no longer reacting to the city. He was directing it. The terminal moved according to his rhythm. Samuel began his walk across the terminal square. He did not need to clear a path. As he stepped forward, the dense crowd of commuters and travelers shifted instinctively, creating a wide, clear lane for him to pass. He moved with a steady, unhurried gait, his eyes fixed on the horizon of the terminal. People who had been rushing to catch their buses slowed their pace, glancing at him with a mixture of recognition and deference. He reached the row of fruit stalls where he had once scavenged for scraps. The vendors stopped their shouting. They did not call out their prices or try to push their wares. Instead, they nodded as he walked by, a silent, unified gesture of respect that rippled down the line. He did not offer a smile or a word. He simply acknowledged the rhythm of their work. He had no crown of gold, no title, and no badge of office. He possessed something more durable, the absolute recognition of the people who inhabited this space. He reached the far edge of the square, turned, and looked back at the sprawling, chaotic heart of the city that now moved in perfect synchronization. The sun dipped below the skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the terminal floor. Samuel stood at the center of the square, the vibration of the city rising through the concrete and into his bones. He looked at the bus routes, the vendors, and the endless stream of faces. He was no longer the boy who arrived with nothing, clutching a single note and hiding in the dark. He had carved his existence into the very foundation of this place. He felt the city breathe, a rhythmic pulse that matched his own. The fear of being invisible had vanished, replaced by the certainty of being known. He was home. The terminal was no longer a labyrinth of strangers, but a machine he understood and guided. He stood motionless as the evening lights flickered to life. He was the boy who owned the heart of the city, and for the first time, he did not need to move to prove it. He simply existed, and the world moved around him.